Welcome and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Roush. I'm your own personal sales maven here to offer you tips and strategies and techniques to master your sales conversations and your sales performance. Because today we're going to talk about how to maximize sales potential after a less than perfect performance. We've all had them. And maybe you're thinking of one in particular. And because you felt like it was less than perfect, you have held yourself back from reaching out and inviting people to work with you, following up. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It is a common challenge where when we're not happy with our performance, we kind of want to become like a turtle, like stick our head like back in our shells and hope that nobody notices, right? And so therefore we play small. And that is not helping you reach your ideal clients and make the impact in the world that you know you are destined to make. You're here, you're put here for a purpose. You know that about yourself. And in order to do that, you have to continue to put offers out, even when things don't go as well as you want. Now, keep in mind this idea of a less than perfect performance. This is your own criticism. This is not other people's criticism of you. We are always our own worst and harshest critic. I know I always say like my critic, or I'll say critics, because I definitely have multiple voices in my head that love to criticize. Maybe that implies I need more therapy with the multiple voices. But the fact of the matter is, my critic never says things like, oh, girl, you did your best. You'll do better next time. No, I don't know about you, but my critic is mean. My critic calls me names. My critic says, like, hey, idiot, you completely flubbed that. Like, you know better. You should do better. And this is totally unacceptable. There's usually a lot of cursing involved as well, right? So being our own worst critic, it's normal then to want to hold back. And yet that is not going to again bring in your ideal clients and allow for them to experience the true benefit of what they're going to get, the changes that are going to happen in their life or their business as a result of working with you. So we got to learn how to set some of this aside. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. And it made me think about when I was preparing for this episode, it made me think about years ago, a friend of mine went to a conference and they had a panel up on stage of all these really high performing, very successful women entrepreneurs. These women have accomplished things that, like, I don't even have dreams that big, I'll say, the kind of things they've accomplished, these women. And she was sharing with me that somebody had asked a question of the panel, and it went something like this. So I wasn't in the room. I'm hearing this, right, like secondhand, third hand really. um the question was, at what point did you reach a level of success that you stopped having what most women have, which was imposter syndrome? And as they went down the panel, every single woman on stage was like, uh I'll let you know when that happens, or I haven't reached that yet. And here's this huge, like, room full of women who are great admirers of the women who are up on the panel. And they're thinking, like, wow, they've achieved things that I can't even, imagine in my business, in my career. And they're still struggling with imposter syndrome. And I will say, I remember that story often because so many times when I am kicking myself and berating myself for not doing a very good job or not performing at the level that I expect out of myself, and also feeling that imposter syndrome kind of bubble to the surface, I just remember, like, maybe this is just an ongoing thing and it's just something you have to learn how to be resilient and push through. So I'm going to give you some strategies as we talk about, because again, the purpose of this episode is to really continue to sell, even when your performance is not up to your standards. And this came about from a question of a Sales Maven Society member in one of our group coaching sessions not too long ago. And we were talking through this, and that really is what prompted me to want to do this episode, was because I just was like, oh my gosh, I can relate to this. And I feel like so many other, and there was a lot of comments and chats of, in the chat, there were a lot of comments of people going like, oh yeah, been there. I can relate to this. Like, I'm glad you asked this question, right? I love when somebody will be really vulnerable and put themselves out there and ask a question that the rest of us are like, I almost feel too embarrassed to ask that question, but yet we're all thinking it. I love the people who are brave like that. Okay, so first and foremost, we got to shift your perspective. That is, and shift our own perspective. So I'm kind of talking to myself as much as I'm hopefully giving something that will be of value to you in this episode. Um, First, it's to recognize the positives and understand that the participants or the people in the room or the person, if it's a one interaction, a one-on-one interaction, they don't know the difference between what you consider your like best performance versus like your like, I could have done that better kind of performance. They don't know the difference. So even when you feel like you're off your game, it doesn't mean that that's the experience the other person is having with you. Oftentimes because they don't know any different. Now, they might not be walking out of if you're up on stage giving a talk, they might not be walking out of that talk going like, "Oh, best presenter of the conference." And they're probably still getting something out of it. Um, I think it's really important to remember that, to recognize what are the things that did go well. And I know I've talked about this in other episodes about your performance will be within a range, and on the days where you're really on and you're just like you're well rested, you're well fed, you're just like firing on all cylinders, your energy is at the level that you want it to be. Like maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, that day you might be 8.5, maybe a 9. Like you're so good, you're so on. But you have to remember your performance will always be within a range. And there are some days where, like, your best that you have that day is a 4 because of a myriad of things, right? Maybe you didn't sleep well, or maybe you are not well nourished, or maybe something really hard is going on in your life that has nothing to do with the performance that you're about to give or the sales conversation that you're about to have, but it still impacts it. And so maybe you're a 4 that day, and recognizing that the goal isn't always to be an 8 or a 9 because that's unrealistic to think that that's going to be the case. So it's like learning how to be the best 4 you can be. Like maybe I can get it to a 4.5, or maybe if I really push, or take some time to get some protein in my system or whatever it is, maybe I can get it to a 5, but be okay with wherever you are. And I know I did an episode about this. It's episode 206. It's called How to Stop Sabotaging Your Sales Success. So if you haven't listened to that, you might want to. Um, so understanding like it's within a range, and sometimes you just gotta like go, okay, I was the best 4 I could be that day. That's all I had to give. Um, and just acknowledge that. I think if you're willing to acknowledge this about yourself, then it doesn't have to become the like get the whip out, beat myself down, and not follow up with people because I feel embarrassed about my performance, which was the case. Again, I mentioned this client who brought this situation into a coaching session. Is she was like, I feel like I can't even follow up with people because I'm disappointed in my performance. And if you have ever experienced that, or if you ever experience this, I hope you'll refer back to this episode and realize it's really not about you and your performance. It's about what did the audience take away? What did the person that you were in conversation with? How was the experience for them? Maybe it wasn't as best as you would have liked it to be, but as long as they got something out of it, you don't want to rob them of having that next great experience with you, which will probably be even better because you'll be more on your game when you talk to them the next time, or have an opportunity for them to sign up for your program or whatever it is that you're offering. So you don't want to rob people of that experience by not issuing your follow-ups, not sending the offers. we got to still send them. I had actually this wasn't very long ago. I was presenting to a group. I'd been paid to present to this group, and I had a very small window of time to present. Quite a lot of content. I had prepared a lot of content. Yeah, my performance was not my best that day because the presenter, or excuse me, the organizer of the event took a little bit longer, kind of welcoming everybody into the room and getting everybody ready, talking about how she knew me. And I was just watching the minutes tick away and I was going like tick, tick, tick. Oh my gosh, that's one less minute there. Okay, now I'm two less minutes than I thought I had to present, three less minutes, four. And it got to where it was like seven. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can fit my full presentation and give this to people with seven less minutes unless I talk really fast. And I don't know if you've heard me talk about this before, but right, like we have a rate of speech. So again, on a scale of like 0 to 10, people who talk really, really fast, they've got a lot to say. Sometimes they don't even take breaths between their sentences, they don't pause. And it's just like fire hose, right? And so I tend to fall on the faster side, I think. And in this particular instance, I went into like save the presentation mode in my mind. So I was going to talk really fast. So I went from probably my normal when I'm speaking and especially when I'm teaching or presenting, I try to keep it somewhere in like a 6. And I was like a 9.5. I was talking so fast that about, I don't know, 7 minutes into my presentation, the organizer interrupted and said, like, Nikki, I'm sorry to interrupt. And she referenced that she's from an area where people naturally talk faster. And she was like, and even I am struggling to follow along with your presentation. Okay. In that moment, I was one, super grateful that she pointed it out to me. I didn't realize that I was talking as fast as I was until she interrupted me. So thank goodness she did because it allowed me to slow down. I was mortified, right? Because I consider myself like an experienced presenter and I really try to pay attention to the audience experience. And I teach this, right? Like rapport first, relationship always. It's such a core of who I am. And I had just completely dropped the ball. So now I have to finish this presentation. I'm upset with myself. And when I got done with the presentation and got like, we finished, and now I'm like back in my office, just me. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I did the exact same thing on the last speaking gig that I had, and nobody interrupted me, but somebody did type into the chat. That was like a fire hose of information. And I did get good feedback from the previous one from some of the people in the room, but and I remember thinking at the time like, "Oh, I'm not sure like is that a negative?" And then now, after experiencing myself speaking so freaking fast, I realized I had done it on another situation too. Now I know my content and I give a lot of the same talks and I say a lot of the same things. So I can talk it really fast because I know what I mean. But it's not about me. It's about the people in the room. It's about the attendees, the participants, the people who paid money to be in that room. So me talking fast doesn't actually do anything for them. So it was a complete like, oh, Nikki, like get it together. And yes, I was mortified, but at the same time, I have to set aside my own feelings and my own judgment. And I'm sharing this story because I hope you know, like I, uh, well, am a moron most of the most of the time. I walk around feeling like a moron. I feel like a fraud often. And I really do try to do my best, but my best is never what I expect of myself. And yet I will still push through and put offers out. I will still push through and send that follow-up email and invite people to take that next step. And so I'm hoping that even if you haven't probably ever made some of the biggest mistakes like I have, that if you're holding yourself back in some way, that this episode will inspire you to go ahead and push through. So we've got to learn how to follow up without fear, right? So we've got to overcome any hesitation or self doubt. If there's something that's holding you back from sending that follow up email because you felt like the meeting didn't go as well as I wanted it to go, or like, oh, I missed a step here, or I said this thing there and I'm kind of embarrassed about it now. And I told them I would follow up, but I don't because I feel like they're probably judging me or they probably don't want to hear from me because I didn't do as well as I thought. You have to just set that self-doubt aside and you have to be willing to follow up because one, it speaks to your character about integrity, I think, about following up. If you say you're going to follow up, or if you say on a presentation that there's an offer coming, that offer has to come. It just does. Even if every single person rejects it because let's say you completely like flubbed the whole thing. I don't know. I can't imagine a time where it would go so bad that people would be like, I never want to hear from that presenter again because you like they're going to make their own they're going to have their own experience. We have to be willing to allow people to have their own experience, right? They're going to make of that presentation or of that meeting or of that conversation with you, they're going to make it make sense in their own mind in some way. So we have to be willing to continue to put ourselves out there and follow up and keep with our integrity. If we say we're going to do something, or if that's a part of the process, we go and we speak, there's an offer that comes for everybody who signs up for the freebie, then the offer has to go. It just does. And even if you feel a little embarrassed about it, send it anyway. Remember, you're sending it to a person. There's just one person reading that email. They're not sitting around in that same group going like, "Can you believe this presenter? Like she didn't even do a very good job or she talked way too fast and who could even follow her? I would never work with her." Like they're not having these like get-together meetings talking about you. So somebody might be thinking that, but there's somebody else who's like, I really need what this presenter offers. I could really benefit from this in my life or business in some way. So then they're grateful that you sent this follow up. And when I was talking about this with my client, it was like you can't just send one invitation, right? Like if you don't hear back from somebody, you send another follow up. And as a matter of fact, I have like a follow up guide. If you haven't grabbed it yet, it's available for all the podcast listeners. I will gift this to you. It's got scripts in it. It's got like when do you follow up, like how many days, like those, so you're not sitting around. So even if you need that just to like make yourself do it, it's like, okay, I've got this guide and I'm going to follow this guide. So I'm going to send this email, then go and grab it. You can get it by going to yoursalesmaven.com/Maven. So it's in the resource center for the podcast listeners. So it's my follow-up guide. Go grab it, get the scripts, send the emails, send the offer, send the follow-up, whatever that needs to happen. And remember that you might have talked about the offer in your presentation, but if the presentation wasn't going as well as you wanted, maybe you didn't outline the offer as well as you would have. So the offer has to go out again in an email. And sometimes people need that like next nudge from you to take action. I do track in my own business when I send offers, the like what email buyers come in on. And I find that there's a reason that I send 4 to 5 emails in a promotional series because I get the majority of my buyers on emails 3 and 4. And usually, like 1 or 2 will come in on email 5. And I'm always so grateful that I sent the email because, oh, I get to work with this person now because they bought and they didn't buy on email 1, 2, or 3 or 4. They bought on email 5. So you have to continue to do those follow ups and send the messages, even if you're feeling a little self conscious about your performance. Now, here's another thing that came up in the conversation is it was recorded in this particular presentation, and the recording was part of the commitment, right? That if you signed up for it, and even if you couldn't make it live, you could have access to the recording. And so my client was like, I do not want to send this recording. I'm not happy with it. And it turned out that she had given the same presentation, I think it was like a month earlier, and it had been recorded. And I said, well, then send the one that was a month earlier if you feel like it went better. And if anybody questions, like, hey, I was on that live and then I watched the recording and it seemed like a different, like I didn't see myself on the recording. All you have to do then is say, like, there were some issues. And so I went and I sent you the previous recording so you could still have the content. Like, you don't have to explain the story of like, oh, I wasn't happy with my performance, so I didn't send the recording. Now, if you only have one recording of it, and again, if it's something that you committed to, you want to make sure that you follow up and send the recording, even if it's like it's not great. Sometimes there are technical issues. I actually have had things where I've promised to send a recording. It was part of the commitment and then forgotten to record it. That's horrible, right? Especially because the Q&A stuff is usually like where the magic happens. I love the Q&A. And so then I've had to re-record it, just me talking to the camera and send that. And I will say nobody is ever like, "Hey, what happened?" They either watch it or they don't. They either get the content and they're delighted that they got it or they don't. And that's okay too, right? Like you want to be really careful about not making assumptions about what people's experience is going to be. So if you've got another recording and you feel like it's a stronger recording, send that. And if you don't, send the one that you have, right? And if you really are like, it's really bad, then just record it yourself. Like make a new recording. I actually did this one time. It was a 2-hour presentation and there was an issue with the recording. It wasn't my performance, but there was an issue with the recording. And I had to take 2 more hours and record it by myself to send it out. Like it's worth it. And it resulted in clients. So again, it's worth it for you to take that time to do those things. And then here was another thing that came up in the conversation. So I want to comment on this too, because one of the reasons that my client was making some judgments about her performance is she was talking about that there was a lack of participation from the attendees and that wasn't the norm for her, that usually people are really interactive. And she felt like there was just silence, like it was crickets. And so that was another reason that she was making these judgments about her performance. And I want to caution you from making those judgments in situations, especially when you're presenting over video, right? Like something on Zoom and the audience, they all have their camera off. It drives me so nuts. Oh my gosh. When you're an attendee for a presenter on Zoom, just out of goodwill, please turn your camera on. Show them that you're there. Everybody, where you're looking at like all the black screens with just people's names on it, it's disheartening to a speaker, to a presenter. And so when you find yourself in that situation, you'll be like, why is everybody's cameras off? Like, please turn your camera on. I always have my camera on, even though I hate being on camera. I hate it so much, but I turn off self view so that I don't have to sit there and just judge myself. But I'm on camera for the sake of the presenter or the speaker. Like I'm there to show my support and I really do want to learn. Like I'm a good audience member because I want to learn. I want to hear what people have to say. I'm so interested. Otherwise, I'm not in attendance, right? So turn your camera on, people. But at the same time, when you're the presenter and everybody's got their cameras off, like I actually imagine in those moments that I am presenting, I have a few people that I bring to mind. And so I just imagine that they're sitting in front of me and then I'm presenting to them. Now, these particular people that are like my people, there's three in particular that come to mind. I know that if I was presenting to them, they would be sitting there totally interested, completely engaged, making eye contact with me. There probably would be smiles and laughs at certain things that I said. And so I just imagine them on the other side of the camera, like they're there and I'm just talking to them just to keep my energy level up because it can like, plummet when you feel like you're not talking to anybody. And then just because people aren't asking questions doesn't necessarily mean that that's a reflection on your performance. It could be, and especially if you don't know this group that you're presenting to, like if this isn't a one, like if it's a structured group, like you're going into somebody else's, group program and presenting to them, maybe their culture is one where they don't interact a lot and they don't feel safe to interact a lot. And so they're hesitant to do that with you. Or it could be that they don't know anybody else in the room and they don't feel safe to interact. They don't know if it's appropriate or if it's okay to make comments. So sometimes, unless you have a couple people who are willing to extend themselves and make comments in the chat and, you know, unmute themselves and ask a question and like they don't want to be the person who goes first. So like give some grace to those moments and be careful about making a lot of assumptions about what that means about your performance. You may have heard me talk about this that one of the there's two things that salespeople do. Well, really, people, I shouldn't just say salespeople, that people do that are so detrimental, especially in sales, is that we project limiting beliefs onto the person that we're in conversation with. So using, the topic that we're talking about, we're projecting that, oh, they're not getting what I'm saying, or they're not interested in what I'm saying because they're being quiet. And then we hallucinate and we act as if we can read their minds, right? Like, and unless you actually have a business where that is the service that you offer is like psychic, like you don't get to do that. It's not helpful to you, and it's definitely not helpful to how you show up in a conversation when you're hallucinating that you know what people are thinking and why they're thinking things. So if you're making judgments about your performance because of a lack of participation. Now, I don't mean that you shouldn't evaluate your performance. I'm not saying that, but be careful about making assumptions. If you want to check to see, then reach out to some of the participants and ask them, how was that experience for you? Or what if anything could have made it better? Is there any feedback that you could have for me that would help for me to improve the next time I talk on this talk, right? Like ask for feedback before making assumptions about it. And then as we wrap up this episode, I want to just again encourage the importance of pushing through these moments where you're not happy with your performance and so you're not going to follow up. It's like it's you just have to anyway, because that person who will get that follow up from you and who will decide to take action on it, their life could be changed. Their business could be changed as a result of it. And so you do bear some responsibility. And in this moment, you're a leader. Like you're the guide because you are the one who had committed to doing some kind of a follow-up, sending a quote, sending an offer, whatever that is. So you really have to stand in that place of credibility and just do it. And then let people decide. Let the chips fall where they may, right? People can decide, not to hire you, not to move forward, not to, take you up on the offer or the proposal. That's their decision. Just don't decide it for them. Be willing to extend yourself and let them decide. And I always say, like, you don't send follow-ups for the people who aren't going to hire you, who aren't interested. You send them for the person who's like, thank goodness I got this message from you today because I had forgotten that I wanted to take action on this. Or thank goodness this offer came through because the timing is perfect for me. and I'm ready to take this next step with you. That's who you're following up for. And the other people, like, bless and release in these moments, and they'll come back, or you'll have an opportunity to be back in front of them if they really need what it is that you offer and they're interested in taking some kind of next step with you. All right. How was this presentation? How was this podcast for you? Was it helpful? Did it inspire you to send some follow-ups? Um, are you making judgments about yourself that is keeping you from putting yourself out there, from sending the follow-ups, from sending the offers? If you would, or if you feel inclined to share, would you please? I'm always so delighted to hear from people and what were the takeaways from the episode. I really appreciate you listening. If you liked this episode and you feel like it's one that you want to share with somebody, please do. If you want to leave a review for the podcast, I'm always super honored by that. So thank you in advance for your consideration. And in the meantime, I am just wishing you so much continued success in your follow ups and all of your sales conversations. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.